The Carter family had always believed in hard work, kindness, and staying out of trouble. John Carter, a respected schoolteacher, had spent years shaping young minds. His wife, Lisa, worked long shifts as a nurse, helping people in need. Their two teenage kids, David and Maya, were bright students who dreamed of big futures. And then there was Grandma Eleanor, the heart of the family, always sharing wisdom and keeping everyone together. It was a peaceful evening in the Carter household. The family had just finished dinner, and laughter filled the air as they sat in the living room, chatting about their day. Maya was excitedly talking about her upcoming school debate, and David was showing his father a new book he had picked up from the library. Lisa sat beside Grandma Eleanor, helping her with her knitting while soft music played in the background. It was an ordinary night, filled with warmth and love. Then, out of nowhere, loud sirens broke the calm. The sudden sound made everyone pause. The flashing red and blue lights outside their window made Lisa's heart race. It wasn't every day that police cars showed up in their quiet neighborhood. John stood up, confused, and walked toward the window. As he pulled back the curtain, his stomach tightened. Several police officers were standing outside, their faces serious, their hands resting near their belts. Before anyone could react, there was a loud, firm knock on the door. Bang, bang, bang. "Open up. This is the police," a voice commanded. Lisa exchanged a worried glance with John. "What's going on?" she whispered. John took a deep breath. "I don't know, but let's stay calm." He turned to the kids. "David, Maya, go to Grandma. Stay close." The knocking continued, growing louder and more impatient. John unlocked the door and slowly opened it. "Good evening, officers. How can I help you?" he asked politely, his voice steady but unsure. The officer in charge, a tall man with sharp eyes, stepped forward. "We have reason to believe that the people inside this house are connected to a crime. We need you all to come with us." John's eyebrows furrowed. "A crime? I think you have the wrong house, officer. We've been home all evening." Lisa stepped forward, concern in her voice. "There must be a mistake. We haven't done anything wrong." But the officers weren't listening. Instead, they exchanged glances before moving forward. "Step aside, sir. We need to bring everyone in for questioning." Fear gripped Lisa's heart. Questioning? On what basis? One officer pointed to a notepad. "A witness description matches this household." John shook his head, trying to stay calm. "That can't be right. We are a hard-working family. My wife is a nurse. I'm a teacher. My children—" "Enough," another officer interrupted. "We don't have time for this." Before John could protest, the officers stepped inside. In a matter of moments, everything turned upside down. Handcuffs clicked onto John's wrists. Another officer grabbed Lisa's arms, pulling them behind her back. Maya let out a scared cry as an officer reached for her. David tried to step in, but an officer pushed him back. Grandma Eleanor, her frail hands shaking, pleaded with the officers. "Please, this is wrong. You're making a mistake." But her words fell on deaf ears. The family was marched out of their home, past their shocked neighbors who had come out to see the commotion. The night air was cold, but the humiliation burned worse. Lisa's eyes filled with tears as she saw David and Maya being led into a police car. John clenched his jaw, refusing to let fear take over. As they were driven away, one thought ran through John's mind. The ride to the police station was long and silent. The Carter family sat in the back of the police cars, their wrists bound, their hearts heavy. The flashing lights outside the window reflected on their faces, but none of them spoke. What was there to say? They were being taken away like criminals, but they had done nothing wrong. John kept his eyes on his wife, Lisa. She was holding back tears, her face pale with fear. He wanted to tell her it would be okay, but even he wasn't sure. His mind raced, trying to figure out what had just happened. A mistake, they had said. A case of matching a description. But what did that even mean? Beside him, Maya and David sat close together, their hands shaking. They were just kids, and yet here they were, treated like suspects. John clenched his fists, frustrated and helpless. When they arrived at the station, the officers pulled them out one by one. The bright lights of the police building made them squint. People were watching. Some officers, a few strangers. Some looked curious, others indifferent. The Carter family was led inside, past cold, gray walls, and into a small, empty room. The air smelled like old coffee and dust. The officers separated them, taking John and Lisa to different rooms while David and Maya were made to sit in a corner under the watchful eyes of another officer. John's heart pounded as he sat down across from two officers. They stared at him, their expressions unreadable. Then one of them spoke. "Let's make this simple. We have a report that connects you and your family to a robbery that happened earlier today. Do you want to tell us the truth now?" John blinked in disbelief. "A robbery?" He shook his head. "That's impossible. We were home all evening. We didn't do anything." The officer leaned forward. "A store was robbed just a few miles from your house. The description we got matches you and your family. So, tell us where you were between 6 and 7 p.m. John frowned. "I already told you. We were at home. My wife, my kids, and my mother. We had dinner, talked, and then sat together in the living room." The officers exchanged a glance. One of them sighed. "So, you're saying the witness is lying?" John shook his head. "I'm saying you have the wrong people." Meanwhile, in another room, Lisa was going through the same thing. A different officer was asking her the same questions, his voice sharp and impatient. "You're a nurse, right?" the officer asked, flipping through some papers. "Yes," Lisa answered. "So you expect me to believe that instead of being at the robbery, you were just at home, being a good mother?" Lisa's eyes widened. "What are you suggesting? That because I'm a nurse, I must be a criminal?" The officer smirked but didn't respond. In the waiting area, Maya and David sat in silence. Maya's hands gripped her brother's tightly. She had never been this scared in her life. David was trying to stay strong, but even he felt like crying. "Excuse me," Maya finally spoke up, her voice small but firm. "We didn't do anything. Can we at least call someone?" The officer watching them sighed. "You'll get your call when it's time." Maya turned to David. "What do we do?" she whispered. David swallowed hard. "We wait." Hours passed. The questions kept coming. Over and over, John and Lisa told the same truth, but no one seemed to believe them. Then, suddenly, everything changed. A loud voice echoed through the station. Footsteps approached quickly. Someone important had arrived. And just like that, the officer's expressions shifted. The real story was about to come out. The air inside the police station felt heavy, almost suffocating. John sat in the cold chair, his wrists sore from the handcuffs. He had answered every question the officers threw at him, but no matter how many times he told the truth, they refused to listen. Across the table, the officer studying him leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk. "You keep saying you were home," he said, shaking his head. "But people lie all the time." John took a deep breath, controlling his frustration. "I'm not lying," he said firmly. "My family and I were at home. My children were studying. My wife and I were talking to my mother. We are innocent." The officer exhaled loudly, acting as if he was tired of hearing the same answer. "Then why did the witness say you were there?" John's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but I do know we had nothing to do with any crime." Meanwhile, Lisa sat in another room, her heart pounding. She had never felt this helpless before. The officer questioning her seemed uninterested in what she had to say. Instead, he kept circling around the same accusations. "We have security footage showing a group running out of the store," the officer said. "You expect me to believe none of them were you or your husband?" Lisa looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, because it wasn't us." The officer smirked. You think just saying that makes it true. Lisa took a deep breath. No, but the real evidence will. In the waiting area, David and Maya were growing restless. Maya kept glancing around, looking for any sign of help. David, sitting beside her, clenched his fists. He had never been in trouble before, not even at school. And now, here they were being treated like criminals. I don't understand, Maya whispered. Why is this happening? David shook his head. I don't know, but Mom and Dad will fix it. Just then, a loud voice echoed from the hallway. Where are they? Bring them to me now. David and Maya looked up as a man in a police captain's uniform walked in. His face was stern, his eyes filled with something different from the other officers. Concern. The arresting officers stiffened when they saw him. Sir, we were just questioning. The captain raised a hand, silencing them. I want to see their files. Now. The officers scrambled to gather the documents. The captain flipped through them, his frown deepening. What is this? He asked sharply. Where is the solid evidence? One of the officers hesitated. Well, the description matched. The captain's eyes narrowed. A description. That's all you have. He turned toward the officer who had interrogated John. Did you even check their alibi, their whereabouts? Or did you just assume they were guilty because they were convenient suspects? The room fell silent. The officers looked at each other, unsure of what to say. The captain didn't wait for an answer. He turned toward another officer at a nearby desk. Get the security footage from their neighborhood. Now. The officer quickly moved to a computer, typing in commands. The room remained tense as everyone waited. A few minutes later, the screen displayed video footage from a street camera near the Carter family's house. The timestamp showed the exact time of the robbery. And there, clear as day, was the entire family, inside their home, laughing and talking. The truth was out. John, Lisa, David, and Maya had been innocent all along. The officers who had arrested them exchanged nervous glances. Their mistake had just been exposed. And now, they knew they were in trouble. A heavy silence filled the room as the security footage played on the screen. The timestamp didn't lie. The Carter family had been inside their home at the exact time of the robbery. There was no way they could have committed the crime. John watched the officers closely. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others avoided eye contact. It was clear that they realized their mistake, but no one wanted to be the first to admit it. The police captain, his face tight with anger, turned to the officer who had led the arrest. Explain this, he demanded. The officer swallowed hard. Sir, we received a witness report that matched their description. The captain's eyes burned with frustration. A description. That's all you had. No real evidence. No proper investigation. The officer hesitated. You thought wrong. The captain's voice was sharp. He turned back to the screen, watching the video of John and Lisa sitting on their couch, talking with Grandma Eleanor, while Maya and David played a board game nearby. The footage was crystal clear. Lisa, still in handcuffs, looked at the officers, her voice shaking with anger. You dragged my family out of our home, humiliated us in front of our neighbors, scared my children. For nothing. John, always the calm one, took a deep breath. What would have happened if this footage didn't exist? His voice was steady, but there was deep pain behind his words. Would you have still blamed us for something we didn't do? The officers didn't respond. The captain's jaw tightened. Take off their handcuffs. Now, one by one, the cuffs were removed. Lisa rubbed her sore wrists, while John stretched his hands. Maya and David rushed to their parents, hugging them tightly. Lisa held them close, whispering, It's okay. It's over now. But John knew it wasn't really over. The captain turned back to his officers. I want the real suspects found immediately, he ordered. And as for this, he gestured toward the Carter family. This is a disgrace. I will personally see to it that this never happens again. He then faced John and Lisa. "I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I am sorry. This should have never happened to you." John exhaled slowly. He appreciated the apology, but the damage was done. His children had been forced to experience fear they should have never known. His wife had been treated like a criminal despite doing nothing wrong. And his mother, back at home, had been left in distress. Lisa looked the captain in the eye. "We deserve better. Families like ours deserve better." The captain nodded. "You're right." He turned to one of the younger officers. "Get them home safely." As the family walked out of the station, heads turned. Some officers watched in silence, while others looked down at their desks. The same people who had arrested them hours ago now had to face the truth. They had been wrong. The police car that had once taken them away in handcuffs now drove them home in silence. When they reached their house, John stepped out first, looking around at the familiar sight of their quiet street. A few neighbors peeked from their windows, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Lisa held Maya and David's hands as they walked up the front steps. As soon as the door opened, Grandma Eleanor rushed forward, pulling them into a tight hug. Tears streamed down her face. "I prayed for you," she whispered. "I knew the truth would come out." John looked around at his family, his heart heavy yet determined. They were home. But this wasn't just their story. This was bigger than them. Something needed to change, and he was going to make sure it did. The Carter family was finally home, but the weight of the night's events still hung over them. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt different, like a place where something had been taken away. John sat in the living room, his elbows resting on his knees, deep in thought. Lisa sat beside him, her hand resting on his. Across from them, Maya and David sat close together, their faces still showing traces of fear and confusion. Grandma Eleanor walked in, carrying a tray of tea. "Drink this," she said softly. "It will calm your nerves." Lisa took a sip, but it did little to ease the storm inside her. She looked at John. "We can't just let this go." John nodded. "I know. But what do we do?" Lisa's hands tightened around her cup. "They humiliated us, treated us like criminals. And for what? A mistake." Maya, her voice small but firm, spoke up. "But what if this happens to someone else? Someone who doesn't have security footage to prove they were innocent?" John sighed. His daughter was right. The truth had saved them, but what if the truth hadn't been recorded? Would they still be sitting here, free? Or would they have been locked away for something they didn't do? David clenched his fists. "They didn't even believe us. They didn't even check before arresting us." Grandma Eleanor, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Then maybe it's time people start listening." John looked at his mother. Her wise eyes held something powerful, determination. He sat up straighter. "You're right." He turned to Lisa. "We need to speak out." Lisa's eyes flashed with purpose. "Yes, we need to tell our story." That night, John wrote down everything that had happened. From the moment the police knocked on their door to the moment they were finally freed. Lisa gathered photos of their bruised wrists from the handcuffs. Maya and David recorded a video, speaking about how they had felt when they were taken away like criminals. The next morning, John sent everything to a well-known journalist. He didn't expect a response so soon, but within hours, his phone rang. "Mr. Carter," the voice on the other end said, "this is big. People need to hear about this. Would you be willing to do an interview?" John exchanged a glance with Lisa, who nodded. "Yes," he said. "We want the truth to be heard." The interview was set for the next day. When the family arrived at the news station, they were nervous but determined. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and soon they were seated in front of a journalist, ready to tell their story. John spoke first, his voice calm but firm. "We are a hard-working, law-abiding family. And yet we were dragged from our home, humiliated in front of our neighbors, and treated like criminals, all because someone thought we matched a description." Lisa added, The police didn't check the facts. They didn't investigate before arresting us. They assumed we were guilty. Maya and David shared how scared they had been. The journalist listened intently, and by the time the interview ended, the world was already talking. By that evening, the news had spread everywhere. Social media was flooded with comments. People were outraged. Others shared similar stories. And at the police station, the officers who had made the wrongful arrest watched the news, their faces pale. The Carter family had spoken, and now the world was listening. The Carter family's story spread like wildfire. News channels replayed their interview, social media was flooded with posts, and people across the country voiced their outrage. Strangers reached out to them, offering support. Some shared their own experiences of being wrongfully accused. Others demanded that the police department take responsibility. John watched everything unfold with a mix of emotions. He had wanted people to listen, and now they were. But what would come of it? Would anything actually change? Lisa scrolled through the messages on her phone. People are angry, she said. They're demanding answers. Maya, sitting beside her, showed a post on her screen. Look at this. There's going to be a protest outside the police station tomorrow. John exhaled slowly. A protest. Lisa nodded. People want justice. They're demanding that the officers who arrested us be held accountable. David, his voice hesitant, asked, "Do you think they'll actually do something about it?" John didn't answer right away. He wanted to believe that change was possible, that this wasn't just another story that people would forget in a week. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, a knock came at the door. John stood up, his body tense. After everything that had happened, he wasn't sure what to expect. Lisa placed a hand on his arm. "Be careful," she whispered. John nodded and slowly opened the door. Standing outside was the police captain, the same man who had released them from custody. His expression was serious but not unkind. "Mr. Carter," he said, "can we talk?" John hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him in. The captain glanced around the living room, then looked at the family. "First, I want to say that I truly regret what happened to you all. It never should have happened." Lisa folded her arms. "And yet it did." The captain sighed. "Yes, and now we have to make it right." John narrowed his eyes. "How?" The captain straightened. "An internal investigation has already started. The officers involved in your wrongful arrest have been suspended while we review their actions. And I assure you, if we find misconduct, there will be consequences." Lisa exchanged a glance with John. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. "There's more," the captain continued. "The department is implementing new policies. We will require body cameras to be worn at all times, and we're changing how officers handle witness reports. No more arrests based on weak descriptions alone." Maya spoke up, her voice small but firm. "And what about other families? What if this happens to them?" The captain looked at her, then at John and Lisa. "That's why I came here," he admitted. "We want to work with you. If you're willing, we'd like to create a community council, one where people like you can help us make sure this never happens again." John was stunned. He had expected excuses. He had expected empty apologies. But this was action. Lisa's expression softened. "You mean real change?" The captain nodded. "If we do this together." John thought about everything they had been through, about how helpless he had felt in that interrogation room, about how scared his children had been. Now they had a choice. They could walk away, relieved that their nightmare was over, or they could stay and fight, not just for themselves, but for every other family who might face the same injustice. John reached out and shook the captain's hand. The next day, the protest outside the police station was even bigger than anyone had expected. Hundreds of people gathered, holding signs that demanded justice. Some carried posters with the Carter family's pictures, while others chanted for change. John, Lisa, Maya, and David stood among them, feeling the energy of the crowd. They had never been part of something like this before, but they knew this was bigger than just their family. A woman holding a microphone stood on a small stage. "We are here today because of what happened to the Carter family," she called out. "But this isn't just about them. This is about every person who has been treated unfairly. This is about making sure it never happens again." The crowd roared in agreement. John stepped forward as the woman motioned for him to speak. He took a deep breath, looking at the faces around him. These were people who cared, people who wanted things to change. He grabbed the microphone and spoke, his voice strong. "My family was taken from our home. We were treated like criminals, not because of evidence, not because of facts, but because someone thought we looked like suspects." The crowd murmured angrily. John continued, "And what if we didn't have security footage? What if we couldn't prove we were innocent? What would have happened then?" Lisa stepped beside him. "That's why we are standing here today," she said, "because this is not just about us. It's about fairness. It's about justice. And it's about making sure no other family has to go through this." The people clapped and cheered. The sound was deafening. But John felt something else too: hope. Just then, a group of reporters arrived, cameras flashing as they rushed to capture the moment. A news anchor turned to the camera. "The Carter family story has sparked national attention, and today the community is standing with them, demanding real change." From a distance, the police captain and several officers stood watching. The captain's face was unreadable, but inside, he knew what he had to do. As the protest continued, the captain stepped forward, signaling for silence. The crowd slowly quieted as he took the microphone. "I am here today," he began, "not just as a police officer, but as someone who believes in doing what is right." He turned to John and Lisa. "The Carter family was wronged, and for that, I apologize again. But apologies are not enough. We need action." Lisa folded her arms, watching him closely. "And what action will you take?" The captain's expression was serious. "Effective immediately, we are reviewing all policies related to arrests. No one will be taken into custody without proper investigation and clear evidence." The crowd cheered. The captain continued, "In addition, we will be working with community members, including the Carter family, to build a system that holds officers accountable and ensures fair treatment for everyone." Maya's eyes widened. "That means real change." The captain nodded. "Yes." John exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and determination. This was just the beginning, but it was a step in the right direction. As the protest ended, people came up to shake John's hand, thanking him for speaking out. Others hugged Lisa, telling her how much her strength had inspired them. David looked around, his young mind realizing something powerful. His family's pain had turned into something meaningful. And as the sun began to set, John knew that their fight wasn't over. But for the first time in days, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A week after the protest, things started to change. The police department officially announced new policies, ensuring that no one would be arrested without proper investigation and solid evidence. Officers would now be required to wear body cameras at all times, and community members, including John and Lisa, would be involved in police training sessions to help prevent wrongful arrests in the future. The Carter family story had reached every corner of the country. News channels continued to cover the changes happening in their town, and people from different cities started demanding similar reforms in their own communities. John and Lisa were invited to speak at schools, community centers, and town hall meetings. They shared their experience, not just as victims, but as advocates for fairness and justice. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Maya and David curled up on the couch beside them. Grandma Eleanor smiled as she watched them. "You've done something big," she said softly. "You've turned pain into purpose." John exhaled, leaning back. "It still doesn't feel real sometimes." Lisa squeezed his hand. "But it is." The next morning, John received an email from a national organization that focused on legal rights and justice reform. They wanted him and Lisa to be part of their advisory board, helping families who had gone through similar experiences. John stared at the screen, thinking about how much had changed in just a few weeks. Before all of this, he had been just an ordinary man, living his life, working hard for his family. Now, people were looking to him and Lisa for guidance, for strength. Lisa read the email over his shoulder and smiled. "We should do it." John looked at her. "Are we ready for this?" Lisa's eyes were full of determination. "If we don't do it, who will?" John nodded. They had come too far to stop now. The weeks turned into months, and life slowly settled back into normalcy. But it was a new normal. The police officers who had wrongfully arrested them were disciplined, and some were even removed from the force. More importantly, the town had become an example of what change could look like when people stood up for what was right. One afternoon, as John was picking up Maya and David from school, a man approached him. He looked nervous but grateful. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I just wanted to say thank you." John looked at him curiously. "For what?" The man exhaled. "A few weeks ago, my nephew was nearly arrested for something he didn't do. But because of the new policies, the officers actually investigated first and realized he was innocent before they even put handcuffs on him." John felt a lump in his throat. This was why they had fought, so that no other family would go through what they had. "You and your wife made a difference," the man said. "You gave people hope." John smiled. "It wasn't just us. It was everyone who spoke up." The man nodded. "Still, you started something." As John drove home, Maya and David sat in the back seat, chatting about their day. The sunlight streamed through the window, making everything feel warm and peaceful. Lisa was waiting at the door when they arrived. She hugged John and smiled. "Long day." John looked at his family, his heart full. "Yeah, but a good one." They had faced injustice. They had fought back. And in the end, they hadn't just changed their own lives. They had helped change the lives of many others. And that, John knew, was just the beginning.